"I was just flirting," she said. Mafia boss slammed his drink and took her against the wall. The air inside Rossi's lounge always smelled of expensive mistakes. It was a blend of aged mahogany, top-shelf bourbon, and the distinctive, cloying perfume of women who were trying too hard to be noticed by men who did not want to be found. Lena Caro knew the scent well. It had clung to her hair and her uniform for the last 6 months, seeping into her pores until she felt like she could not scrub it off, no matter how hot she made the water in her shower. It was nearly 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, yet the lounge was still humming with a low, vibrant energy. The lighting was intentionally dim, amber sconces casting long, flattering shadows across the faces of the city's elite. Politicians, businessmen with loose morals, and the occasional high roller from out of town filled the velvet booths, their voices a murmuring current beneath the slow, mournful cry of the saxophone playing over the speakers. Lena adjusted the tray balanced on her left hand, her wrist aching with a dull throb that had started 3 hours ago. She was 24 years old, but on nights like this, she felt 50. She swept a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear, her eyes scanning the floor with the practiced efficiency of someone who relied on tips to pay rent. She was good at this. She was sharp-tongued when she needed to be, invisible when the situation called for it, and charming enough to make a man spend $50 on a drink he did not even like. But tonight, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The air was thick, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. The cause of that tension was sitting in the private booth at the far end of the room, elevated slightly above the rest of the floor like a throne overlooking a kingdom of fools. Dario Viscari, the owner of Rossi's Lounge, was a ghost story in Elmira. People whispered his name in fear and reverence, but they rarely saw him. He was the shadow behind the city's skyline, the man who moved pieces on a board that Lena could not even see. Usually, the private booth remained empty, a dark void that reminded everyone who was really in charge. But tonight, he was there. Lena tried not to look at him, but it was like trying not to look at a tiger sitting unleashed in the corner of a living room. Dario was a study in lethal elegance. He wore a suit that cost more than Lena would make in 5 years, the fabric charcoal gray and cut to fit broad shoulders that carried the weight of an empire. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was too hard to be classically handsome, but too striking to look away from. He had a scar, faint and jagged, running along his jawline, a permanent reminder that the violence he commanded was not theoretical. He was not drinking. He was not talking. He was simply watching. His dark eyes, cold and unreadable, swept over the room with a predatory stillness. Every time Lena walked past his line of sight, she felt a phantom shiver trace down her spine, as if he had physically reached out and grazed her skin. She shook it off. She had work to do. "Excuse me, sweetheart," a voice called out. Smooth and syrupy, Lena turned, fixing a bright, professional smile on her face. The man at table 4 was new. He was handsome in a conventional, polished way, sandy hair, a suit that was expensive but ill-fitting, and a smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. He had been watching her for the last hour, ordering scotch and leaving generous cash tips on the table every time she cleared a napkin. "What can I get for you?" Lena asked. Stepping up to the table, she kept her posture relaxed, her hip cocked slightly to the side. It was part of the dance. Make them feel special. Make them feel seen, and they would empty their wallets. "I think I'm done with the scotch," the man said, leaning back and draping an arm over the velvet upholstery. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the curve of her waist where her apron was tied. "I was hoping for a recommendation, something sweet, but with a kick, like you." Lena did not roll her eyes, though the urge was strong. Instead, she let out a soft, breathy laugh, tilting her head. "I think you have had enough of the kick for one night," she teased, her voice dropping an octave. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of his suit jacket, just above his elbow. It was a calculated move, a harmless flirtation designed to soothe his ego and increase the tip percentage. "How about water?" And maybe I'll check on you in 20 minutes? The man grinned, clearly delighted by the contact. You are tough, he said, leaning in closer. I like that. What is your name? I don't see a tag. It is Lena, she said, pulling her hand back slowly, letting her fingertips drag for a fraction of a second. And I am only tough on the ones I like. It was a lie. It was all a lie. She was exhausted, her feet were blistering, and she wanted nothing more than to go home, eat cold leftovers, and sleep for 12 hours. But the man beamed, reaching for his wallet from across the room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. In the elevated booth, Dario Vascari had gone perfectly still. His hand, which had been resting loosely around a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, tightened. The knuckles turned white, the heavy glass groaning under the sudden, immense pressure of his grip. He watched Lena, his employee, a woman he had made a point of ignoring for months, laughing at the stranger's table. He saw the way her hand touched the man's arm. He saw the tilt of her head, the softness in her eyes that he knew was manufactured but hated nonetheless. A dark, irrational heat flared in his chest. It was a low burn, starting in his gut and twisting upward like smoke. He did not know this man. He did not care about this man. But seeing him smile at Lena, seeing him bask in the warmth of her attention, woke something possessive and ugly inside Dario. It was a feeling he had not experienced in years, a primal instinct that said mine. He did not own her. He knew that. She was a waitress. She was an employee. She was a civilian who had no business being in his line of sight. But logic was failing him tonight. The beast inside his chest rattled its cage, demanding blood. Down on the floor, the interaction at table 4 shifted. The man, emboldened by Lena's flirtation, reached out. His hand was not gentle. He clamped his fingers around Lena's wrist, his grip tight enough to blanch the skin. Don't run off yet. Lena, the man slurred slightly, his charm dissolving into entitlement. Sit down, have a drink with me. I'll pay for your time. Hell, I'll pay for your whole shift. Lena's smile faltered. The professional mask slipped, revealing the sharp, annoyed woman beneath. She tugged at her wrist, but his grip held. Sir, I can't do that. I'm on the clock. Please let go. Come on, the man insisted, pulling her closer. He was making a scene now, his voice rising. Don't be a tease. You were just touching me a second ago. You want this. Panic flared in Lena's chest, hot and sharp. She was used to drunks, but this was different. There was a gleam in the man's eye that spoke of a refusal to hear the word no. She planted her feet, ready to escalate, ready to shout if she had to. I said, let go, she snapped, her voice losing all its softness. Before the man could respond, a shadow fell over the table. It was not just a shadow, it was a void, blocking out the amber light of the lounge. The air around them seemed to vanish, sucked into the vacuum of the presence that had just arrived. Dario Vascari stood there. He did not look at Lena. His gaze was fixed entirely on the man holding her wrist. Dario's face was a mask of stone, devoid of anger, devoid of pity. It was the face of a man who could end a life as easily as he signed a paycheck. Let her go, Dario said. His voice was not loud. It was a low rumble, a vibration that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone within a 10-foot radius. It was a command, absolute and final. The customer looked up, annoyance flashing across his face before recognition set in. The color drained from his cheeks instantly. The arrogance that had been there a moment ago evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a prey animal realizing it had stepped on a twig in a lion's den. The man's fingers sprang open, releasing Lena as if her skin had suddenly turned to white-hot iron. Mr. Vascari, the man stammered, half rising from his seat, his hands trembling. I didn't realize. We were just having a conversation. Misunderstanding. Dario did not blink. He did not move. He simply stared, his silence stretching out until it became unbearable. You are touching my staff, Dario said, his voice devoid of inflection. You are making a scene in my place of business. You are leaving. Now. It was not a question. The man scrambled, nearly knocking over his chair in his haste. He threw a handful of crumpled bills onto the table. Too much money. A peace offering. and mumbled an apology that nobody listened to. Within 10 seconds, he was weaving through the tables, heading for the exit as if the devil himself were snapping at his heels. Lena stood frozen, rubbing her wrist where the red marks of the man's fingers were fading. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a chaotic rhythm of relief and humiliation. She hated needing help. She hated that Dario had seen her like that, vulnerable, manhandled. She looked up, ready to thank him, to make a joke and diffuse the tension, but Dario finally turned his eyes to her, and the look on his face stopped the words in her throat. He was furious. It was a cold, controlled fury, but it radiated off him in waves. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle feathered beneath the skin. His eyes were dark pits, swirling with something she could not name. "My office," he said. The words were clipped, sharp as broken glass. "Now." He turned and walked away without waiting to see if she followed. Lena stared at his retreating back, her own temper flaring to match his. Who did he think he was? She was the victim here. She was the one who had been grabbed. She grabbed her tray, slammed it onto the nearest empty table with a clatter that made a few patrons jump, and marched after him. The back of Rossi's lounge was a different world. The plush velvet and ambient noise faded, replaced by the hum of industrial refrigerators and the stark glare of fluorescent lights in the hallway. Lena pushed open the heavy oak door to Dario's office and stepped inside. The office was like the man himself, impeccable, expensive, and cold. The walls were lined with dark books. The furniture was black leather and chrome. A single lamp burned on the massive mahogany desk, casting a pool of golden light that did nothing to warm the room. Dario was standing by a sidebar, his back to her. He was pouring a drink. The sound of amber liquid hitting the crystal was the only sound in the room. He did not turn around when the door clicked shut. "That," he said, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed violence, "is not how my staff behaves." Lena felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive barrier against his accusation. "Excuse me? I was doing my job. That guy was a creep. I handled it." Dario turned slowly. He held the glass in his hand, his grip so tight his knuckles were white. "You handled it?" he repeated, his voice mocking. "Is that what you call it? Leaning over him, touching him, laughing at jokes that weren't funny? You looked like you were offering yourself up on a platter." The insult hit her like a physical slap. Lena took a step forward, her fear forgotten in the face of her indignation. She was sharp-tongued, and she was not afraid to use it, even on the king of Elmira. "I was hustling for a tip," she fired back, her voice rising. "That is part of the gig, Dario. I smile, I laugh, I make them feel good so they spend money in your bar. I was just flirting. It meant nothing." "It meant something to him," Dario growled. He took a step toward her, invading her personal space. The scent of him hit her, sandalwood, expensive scotch, and the metallic tang of danger. "He thought he had a right to touch you. He thought you wanted it." "I can't control what some drunk thinks," Lena argued, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. She refused to back down, refused to let him see that her knees were shaking. "I didn't ask him to grab me, and I didn't ask you to swoop in like some white knight and save me. I had it under control." "You had nothing under control," Dario snapped. The jealousy that had been simmering in his gut boiled over. The image of that stranger's hand on her arm, the sound of her laugh directed at another man. It maddened him. He felt a desperate, irrational need to scrub the memory from existence. He slammed his glass down on the desk. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Whiskey sloshed over the rim, staining the polished wood. Lena flinched. Her body reacted instinctively to the violence of the motion, her shoulders jumping, her breath hitching. But she did not retreat. She stood her ground, her eyes locked with his, burning with defiance. "Don't you dare try to intimidate me," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I am not one of your soldiers. You don't own me." The air between them crackled. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. The anger in the room began to shift, twisting into something else, something darker, hotter, and infinitely more dangerous. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of their ragged breathing. Dario looked at her. He really looked at her. He saw the fire in her green eyes, the flush high on her cheekbones, the way her chest rose and fell with every angry breath. She was magnificent. She was defying him, standing up to a man that the entire city feared, and it made him want her with a ferocity that nearly brought him to his knees. He moved. It was a blur of motion, faster than she could react. Dario closed the distance between them. He reached out, his hands gripping her waist, his fingers digging into the fabric of her uniform. He pushed her backward, not violently, but with an inexorable, commanding force. Lena gasped as her back hit the wall, the cool plaster pressed against her shoulder blades, grounding her, trapping her. Before she could protest, Dario was there, his body pressing against hers, a wall of hard muscle and heat. He boxed her in, his hands planting on the wall on either side of her head, caging her. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat. His face was inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises, could feel the warmth of his breath on her lips. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with hunger now, a raw, naked desire that made her blood run hot. "You think I don't own you?" Dario murmured. His voice was a rough caress, dropping to a pitch that vibrated through her entire body. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against hers, a taunting, intimate gesture. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. Lena." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her mind screamed at her to push him away, to run, to slap him, but her body betrayed her. Her hands remained at her sides, her fingers curling into fists. She tilted her head back, exposing the column of her throat. A silent, unconscious invitation. "Then fire me," she breathed, the challenge weak, lacking conviction. Dario's gaze dropped to her mouth. He watched her lips part, watched the shallow intake of her breath, the urge to kiss her, to take her right there against the wall and mark her as his, was overwhelming. It took every ounce of his legendary self-control to hold back. He leaned in closer, his lips barely brushing against hers, a ghost of a kiss, a promise of things that could be. It was electric. The contact sent a shockwave through Lena, her toes curling in her shoes. She felt herself leaning into him, her eyelids fluttering shut, waiting, wanting. But he did not kiss her. Dario pulled back, just an inch. The loss of contact was a physical ache. He stared into her eyes, his expression intense, dark, and utterly serious. "Don't play with fire, Lena," he whispered, the warning wrapping around her like smoke. "Because if you burn, I won't be the one to put you out. I will be the one watching the flames." He held her gaze for 1 second longer, letting the words sink in, letting the threat and the promise settle in the space between them. Then, abruptly, he pushed himself away from the wall. The heat vanished, replaced by the cold chill of the room. He turned his back on her, walking over to the window that looked out over the city lights. "Get out," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the passion that had just nearly consumed them both. "Shift is over. Go home." Lena stood there for a moment, dazed. Her lips tingled where he had almost touched. Her legs felt like jelly. She stared at his broad back, a chaotic storm of emotions swirling in her chest, anger, humiliation, confusion, and a sharp, undeniable throb of arousal. She did not say a word. She straightened her uniform, took a shaky breath, and turned on her heel. She walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her with a soft finality. Later that night, the silence of her apartment felt deafening. Lena lay in her bed, the sheets tangled around her legs. The streetlights from outside filtered through the thin curtains, casting long, distorted shadows across the ceiling. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of Rossi's lounge, a reminder of the reality she lived in. But her mind was not on her rent, or her aching feet, or the fact that she had to be up in 6 hours. Her mind was back in that office. She closed her eyes and she could still feel him, the weight of his body pressing her against the wall, the smell of sandalwood and danger, the rough texture of his voice vibrating against her skin. "Don't play with fire." She touched her lips with her fingertips, tracing the shape of them in the dark. She was angry. She was furious that he thought he could manhandle her, that he thought he could dictate how she did her job. She hated the arrogance of him, the way he looked at her like she was something to be acquired. And yet, a heat coiled low in her belly, a heavy, pulsing ache that she could not ignore. She replayed the moment over and over again, the way his eyes had darkened, the way his hands had caged her. The raw, terrifying intensity of his desire. She turned over, burying her face in her pillow, letting out a frustrated groan. She should be terrified. She should quit her job and never go back. Dario Vascari was dangerous. He was a man who lived in a world of violence and shadows. But as sleep finally began to drag her under, the last thought in her mind was not fear. It was the memory of his lips, a breath away from hers, and the terrifying realization that she had wanted him to close the gap. The atmosphere at Rossi's lounge had shifted in the 48 hours since the incident in the back office. The usual hum of low conversation and clinking glass remained. But for Lena, the air felt tighter, heavier. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room and replaced with a watchful, suffocating pressure. Dario Vascari was nowhere to be seen. The private booth, usually a void of shadows where he presided over his kingdom, sat empty. Yet his absence felt more oppressive than his presence. Lena could feel eyes on her constantly. It was not the leering gazes of drunk patrons this time. It was the staff. It was the bouncers by the door who tracked her movements with sharp, clinical precision. It was the bartenders who went silent when she approached the well to pick up an order. She was being watched. Lena tried to ignore it. She focused on her tables, keeping her smile bright and her movements efficient. But the knot of anxiety in her stomach refused to loosen. She was sharp-tongued and independent, a woman who had raised herself since she was 16. But she knew when the wind had changed direction. She knew when a storm was coming. Around 11 o'clock, the storm walked through the front door, and he was not a regular. Lena knew the regulars. The politicians who tipped well to keep their secrets, the businessmen blowing off steam, the lonely hearts looking for conversation. This man was different. He was tall, wearing a tan coat that looked out of place amidst the sea of black suits and cocktail dresses. He sat at the bar, not at the table, and ordered water. Lena was wiping down the counter nearby when he signaled her over. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was pleasant, almost melodic, but it didn't match the flatness of his eyes. They were pale blue, the color of winter ice. "Do you work here often?" "5 nights a week," Lena replied, keeping her tone professional but guarded. She did not lean in. She did not flirt. The lesson from 2 nights ago was still branded on her mind. The man smiled, but it didn't reach those cold eyes. "Then you must know the owner, Mr. Vascari." The name hung in the air between them like a suspended blade. Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine, distinct and warning. In this part of town, people didn't ask about Dario Vascari casually. They either knew him and feared him, or they knew better than to speak his name at all. "I know who signs the checks," Lena said, scrubbing a spot on the counter that was already clean. "But he's not around much. I barely see him." The man hummed, tapping a finger against his water glass. "Is that so? I heard he takes a special interest in his staff, especially the pretty ones." The implication was subtle, but it hit its mark. Lena stiffened. "I wouldn't know anything about that. If you want a drink, I can get the bartender. Otherwise, I have tables to tend to." She turned to leave, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Tell him an old friend stopped by," the man called after her, his voice low but carrying clearly over the jazz music. "Tell him the Montavios send their regards." Lena did not look back. She walked straight to the service station, her hands trembling as she punched in an order for a gin tonic. She did not know who the Montavios were, but she knew the tone of a threat when she heard one. 20 minutes later, Silvio, Dario's right-hand man, a mountain of a man with a perpetually broken nose, appeared at her side. He did not look at her, pretending to check the inventory on the shelves. "Boss wants to see you," Silvio grunted. "Upstairs." Lena swallowed hard. Now. The walk to the office felt like a march to the gallows. When she entered, Dario was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked streets of Elmira. He did not turn when she entered. The room was dim, lit only by the city glow from outside. "Who was he?" Dario asked. No pleasantries, no greeting. Lena closed the door, leaning back against it for support. "I don't know. He wore a tan coat. He asked about you." Dario turned then. His face was a mask of controlled fury, the same look he had worn when he pinned her against the wall. Only this time, the anger wasn't directed at her. It was a cold, calculating rage directed at the world outside. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know you," Lena said, her voice steady despite the fear fluttering in her throat. "I said I just work here." Dario exhaled, a sharp sound through his nose. He walked around the desk, coming to rest against the edge of it, crossing his ankles. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 2 nights ago. "Good," he said. "Stay away from men you don't know. Lena, do not speak to them. If someone asks for me, you walk away. Do you understand?" His tone was possessive, bordering on commanding. It sparked that familiar flare of defiance in her chest. "I can handle a conversation." "Dario," she said, crossing her arms, "I am not a child. I got rid of him, didn't I?" "You have no idea what you are handling," Dario snapped, his voice dropping an octave. "These are not drunk tourists trying to grab your waist. These are wolves, and you—" He stopped, his eyes sweeping over her, lingering on her face. "You're standing in the middle of the hunting ground wearing a target. I didn't ask for your protection," Lena argued, though her voice lacked heat. The memory of the man's cold blue eyes was still too fresh. "You have it anyway," Dario said, finality in his tone. "Silvio will have someone walk you to your car tonight. Do not argue." Lena wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that she didn't belong to him, that she didn't want to be part of whatever dangerous game he was playing. But looking at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the lethal focus in his eyes, she realized that arguing was pointless. He was a force of nature. You didn't argue with a landslide, you just tried to survive it. The shift ended, and true to his word, a silent guard walked her to her beat-up sedan. He waited until she was inside with the doors locked before turning away. The drive home was a blur. Lena lived in a walk-up apartment on the edge of the city, a place with peeling paint and neighbors who minded their own business. She parked on the street and hurried up the 3 flights of stairs, her keys clutched between her fingers like a weapon. When she reached her door, she stopped. The wood around the lock was splintered. It was subtle, just a few hairline cracks where the jam had been forced. But to someone who had spent her life looking over her shoulder, it screamed danger. Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She reached out and pushed the door. It swung open silently. The apartment was dark. She fumbled for the light switch, her heart pounding so hard she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. The lights flickered on, revealing the violation. It wasn't a robbery. Her television was still there. Her laptop sat on the coffee table. But it was wrong. Everything was wrong. Her dresser drawers had been pulled open, her clothes dragged out and scattered across the floor in a chaotic sea of fabric. It looked like someone had been hunting for something, or perhaps just wanted to show her that they could touch whatever they wanted. She walked further in, stepping over a pile of sweaters. In the bedroom, it was worse. Her photos, the few she had of her mother before she died, the ones from her graduation, were not on the wall anymore. They were laid out on her bed, face up, arranged in a perfect, terrifying row. It was a message. "We were here. We know who you are. We can get to you." Terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. She couldn't stay here. The air in the apartment felt contaminated, thick with the presence of whoever had done this. She backed out of the room, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her keys. She scrambled to pick them up, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She ran. She didn't think about where she was going until she was already in her car, the engine roaring to life. She couldn't go to the police. In Elmira, the police took 40 minutes to respond to a break-in, and half of them were on the payroll of men like the one in the tan coat. She needed safety. She needed a fortress. She drove to the only place she could think of, the Vescari Tower pierced the skyline of downtown, a monolith of steel and glass that looked down on the city like a judge. Lena pulled up to the private garage entrance, praying the guard would let her in. She gave her name, her voice trembling. There was a pause, a buzz, and the gate lifted. When the elevator doors opened into the penthouse, Dario was waiting. He was wearing a white dress shirt, the top buttons undone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He held a gun loosely in his right hand, down by his leg, as if it were an extension of his body. When he saw her pale face, her wide, terrified eyes, the way she was hugging herself as if to hold her shattered composure together, he safetied the weapon and set it on the console table in one fluid motion. "Lena," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an anchor. "They broke in," she whispered, the words tumbling out. "They didn't take anything. They moved things. My photos, my clothes." Dario crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough to shield her from the rest of the room. "Did you see them?" "No, I ran. I didn't know where else to go." "You came to the right place," he said grimly. "You are safe here." He led her into the living area. The penthouse was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the glittering city below. But it was cold. The furniture was sharp-edged and modern, gray leather and black marble. There were no personal touches, no photos, no clutter. It was a beautiful, sterile cage. "Sit," he commanded gently, pointing to a sofa. He went to a bar cart and poured a glass of amber liquid, bringing it to her. "Drink. It will stop the shaking." Lena took the glass with both hands, the crystal cool against her palms. She took a sip. The brandy burned her throat, a grounding fire that helped clear the fog of panic. Dario sat on the coffee table across from her, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. She told him. She described the splintered wood, the clothes, the photos on the bed. As she spoke, Dario's expression grew darker, his jaw tightening until the muscle feathered again. "It is a scare tactic," he said quietly when she finished. "They want you to feel unsafe. They want to flush you out." "Why?" Lena asked, her voice cracking. "I am just a waitress. Dario, I am nobody." "You are not nobody," he corrected her. "You are the woman I pulled into my office. You are the woman I protected in front of a room full of people. In my world, that makes you a weakness, and my enemies exploit weakness." Lena let out a shaky laugh, staring into her drink. "Great. So I am a pawn because you have a possessive streak." "It is not just that," Dario said. He watched her, his gaze softening imperceptibly. "You are different. Lena, you don't bow, you don't break. It draws attention." "I have had to be tough," she murmured. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. "I grew up in the system, Dario, foster homes, some good, mostly bad. I learned early that if I didn't look out for myself, no one else would. I ran away when I was 16. I have been drifting ever since, just trying to find a place where the floor doesn't fall out from under me." Dario listened, his silence heavy and attentive. He reached out, taking the empty glass from her hands and setting it aside. "I know what it is like," he said, his voice rough. "To rely only on yourself. To expect the floor to collapse." "You?" Lena scoffed softly, gesturing to the opulent room. "You own the city." "I own things," Dario corrected. "Possessions, territory, but trust. Trust is expensive. Lena, and betrayal. Betrayal has a cost I have paid too many times." He didn't elaborate, but the look in his eyes spoke of old ghosts, of losses that money couldn't fix. It was the first time she had seen him not as a boss or a monster, but as a man, a lonely, haunted man sitting in a glass tower. The silence that fell between them wasn't tense like before. It was charged, magnetic. The fear of the break-in began to recede, replaced by something far more potent. Lena looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the weariness in his posture, the scar on his jaw, the way his hands, usually so lethal, were resting gently on his knees. She felt a pull toward him, a gravitational force she couldn't resist. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she whispered. The admission hung in the air. Fragile and honest, Dario's gaze locked onto hers. The air in the room seemed to thin. "You are not alone." He stood up, extending a hand toward her. It was an offer, not a command. Lena hesitated for only a heartbeat. She reached out, placing her hand in his. His skin was warm, his grip firm and reassuring. He pulled her up, but he didn't stop there. He drew her closer until her chest bumped against his. The contact was like striking a match. Dario looked down at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of reluctance, finding none. He raised a hand to cup her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. His touch, reverent, almost hesitant. "Lena," he breathed, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. She didn't wait. She surged up on her tiptoes, her hands tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him down. Their mouths met in a collision of desperate need. It wasn't gentle. It was a release of days of tension, of fear, of the unspoken thing that had been simmering between them since the moment they met. Dario groaned low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her waist, crushing her against him. He tasted brandy and danger. She tasted rain and survival. The kiss deepened, becoming frantic. Lena opened to him, seeking, demanding. She wanted to forget the apartment, the man in the tan coat, the loneliness of her life. She wanted to be consumed. Dario swept her up into his arms, his strength effortless. Lena wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of him. He carried her down the hall to the bedroom, a vast space dominated by a massive bed. He lowered her onto the mattress, following her down, his body covering hers like a shield. He braced his weight on his forearms, staring down at her. His eyes were black with desire, burning with a hunger that terrified and thrilled her. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice a ragged rasp. "If we do this, there is no going back. You are in this with me." Lena reached up, tracing the scar on his jaw. She saw the darkness in him, the violence, the baggage, but she also saw the man who had given her a safe harbor when the world tried to drown her. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. "Make me forget." Dario didn't need to be told twice. He lowered his head, capturing her lips again, slow and deep. The world outside the penthouse walls, the threats, the Montavios, the broken lock, ceased to exist. There was only the friction of skin against skin, the heat of their bodies, and the desperate, tangled language of two lonely souls finally finding a place to land. He worshipped her with his hands, exploring every curve, every shiver. Lena met him touch for touch, her nails digging into his shoulders, her breath hitching as he murmured praise against her skin. It was a claim, yes, but it was also a surrender. For the first time in her life. Lena stopped fighting. She let herself be held. She let herself be wanted. And as the night deepened and the city lights flickered below, the line between protector and lover blurred until it vanished completely, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth of their desire. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It brought clarity, sharp and unforgiving. Lena woke to the smell of coffee and the cold emptiness of the other side of the bed. For a few haze-filled seconds, she let herself linger in the memory of the night before, the heat of Dario's skin, the weight of his body, the way he had whispered her name like a secret prayer in the dark. It felt real. It had felt like a shifting of the tectonic plates that made up her lonely, unstable world. She sat up, pulling the silk sheet against her chest. The penthouse was silent. Dario was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, fully dressed in a crisp black suit. He was looking out at the city, his back to her, a rigid line of tension. He looked like a statue carved from ice, utterly removed from the man who had held her hours ago. "Dario?" she called out softly. He turned slowly. His face was a mask. The vulnerability she had glimpsed the night before, the haunted look in his eyes, the desperate need, was gone, walled off behind layers of concrete and steel. "You should get dressed," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. "My driver is waiting downstairs to take you home." Lena felt the words like a physical blow to the chest. She blinked, confusion warring with a sudden, sharp sting of humiliation. What? This was a mistake, Dario said. He did not look at her. He looked through her, at the wall behind the bed. Last night. It should not have happened. It compromises my judgment. It puts you in danger. It will not happen again. The rejection was clinical, efficient. It was a business decision. Lena scrambled out of bed, grabbing her scattered clothes from the floor. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be steady. She would not cry. She would not let him see her break. A mistake, she repeated, her voice rising. She pulled her sweater on, the wool scratching against her sensitive skin. That is what I am to you, a lapse in judgment. You are a liability, Lena, he said, his eyes finally locking onto hers, cold and hard. I cannot afford liabilities. Go home. Forget you were ever here. She stared at him for a long moment, searching for a crack in the armor, a sign that he was lying. But there was nothing. Just the boss of Elmira, dismissing an employee. Fine, she spat. Shoving her feet into her shoes, she grabbed her purse and marched to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, turning back to look at him one last time. You are a coward, Dario. You talk about bravery in war, but you are too terrified to feel anything real. She slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty penthouse. The next 3 shifts at Rossi's lounge were an exercise in torture. Lena showed up on time. She wore her uniform, she smiled at customers, but inside, she was a coil of barbed wire, tight and sharp. She refused to look at the private booth, though she could feel his presence there like a gravity well. Dario was back to his old habits. He sat in the shadows, watching. He did not speak to her. He did not acknowledge her. It was as if she were a piece of furniture he had decided to ignore. The indifference made her furious. If he had been angry, she could have handled it. If he had been cruel, she could have fought back, but this erasure, it burned. On Friday night, the lounge was packed. The music was loud, a frantic jazz rhythm that matched the chaotic beating of her heart. Lena decided she had had enough of being invisible. She walked to the service well where Marco, the new bartender, was mixing drinks. Marco was young, with easy laughter and bright eyes. He was safe. He was normal. Hey, Marco, Lena said, leaning her elbows on the bar, letting her posture slip into something loose and inviting. She made sure her back was to the private booth, but she angled herself enough that anyone watching, specifically one person, could see her profile. You look tired. Tough night. Marco looked up, surprised by the attention. Just the usual Friday chaos. You look nice tonight, Lena. Did you change your hair? Just for you, she teased, reaching over to fix his collar. Her fingers lingered on the fabric. She laughed at a joke he hadn't made, tossing her head back. It was a performance. It was petty and beneath her. But she wanted a reaction. She wanted Dario to storm down from his tower and drag her away. She wanted him to lose control again, just to prove that the Iceman was a lie. She risked a glance toward the booth. Dario was watching, but he wasn't storming down. He wasn't gripping his glass until it shattered. He was simply staring at her, his expression one of weary disappointment. It wasn't jealousy, it was pity. The realization poured ice water over her anger. He didn't care. He had meant what he said. It really was just a mistake. She pulled her hand away from Marco abruptly. I need 2 martinis for table 6, she muttered, her voice dull. 10 minutes later, as she was clearing a table near the kitchen, a shadow fell over her. She stiffened, hoping it was him, dreading it was him. It was Silvio. The giant man looked down at her, his face grim. He blocked her path to the kitchen, effectively cornering her. You are playing a game you do not understand, girl, Silvio rumbled. Lena lifted her chin, balancing the tray of dirty glasses. I'm just working, Silvio. Unless there is a rule against talking to coworkers. You are trying to provoke him, Silvio said bluntly. I have seen men try that. I have buried men who tried that. Is that a threat? It is a warning, Silvio said. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. You think he is cold because he wants to be. You think he pushes you away because he doesn't feel anything? You don't know the wars he has fought. Lena, You don't know what he has lost. Do not test him. If you push the beast too hard, it will not hug you. It will bite." He stepped back, letting her pass. Lena walked into the kitchen, her hands trembling so hard the glasses rattled against each other. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. The city was shrouded in a thick, soupy fog that turned the streetlights into hazy halos. Lena gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Silvio's words replayed in her mind on a loop. "You don't know the wars he has fought." She checked her rearview mirror. 2 bright headlights were keeping pace with her. At first, she told herself it was nothing. It was a main road. Cars traveled it. But then she took a sharp right turn toward the residential district, a turn that no one took unless they lived there. The headlights turned with her. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She took another turn, then another, weaving through the narrow streets of her neighborhood. The car behind her matched every move, staying a constant, predatory distance away. It was a black sedan, sleek and indistinguishable, with tinted windows that swallowed the light. Lena's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers hovering over Dario's number, but shame stopped her. "You are a liability." She wouldn't call him. She wouldn't go running back to the man who had tossed her out like trash. She gunned the engine, running a yellow light. The sedan sped up but stopped at the red, caught by cross traffic. Lena didn't wait. She floored it, screeching around the final corner to her apartment building. She parked haphazardly, not bothering to lock the car, and sprinted for the front door. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her lungs burning, fumbling with her keys. She burst into her apartment, slamming the door and throwing the deadbolt, then the chain, then a chair under the knob. She backed away, chest heaving, waiting for the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Silence. She sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. Shaking, she was safe. She was alone. 10 minutes later, a fist pounded on her door. Lena screamed, scrambling backward until her back hit the sofa. "Go away, I have a gun!" She didn't have a gun. She had a can of pepper spray and a bread knife. "Open the door, Lena!" It wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was Dario, and he sounded furious. Lena scrambled up, pulling the chair away and undoing the locks with trembling fingers. She threw the door open. Dario stood in the hallway. He looked like he had run there. His hair was windblown, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his chest heaving. Behind him, Silvio and 2 other men stood guard by the stairwell, their hands near their waistbands. Dario pushed past her into the apartment, kicking the door shut in Silvio's face. He spun on her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying light. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" he roared. Lena flinched, stepping back. What? My men called you. I called you. You were followed for 6 blocks by a car with no plates, and you decided to play race car driver instead of calling for help? I didn't know they were your men," Lena yelled back, the fear turning into adrenaline-fueled anger. "I thought I was being hunted. I saw a black car and I ran." "You are being hunted." Dario grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip bruising. "That is why I had a tail on you, to protect you, because you were too stubborn to realize that you walked into a war zone." "I didn't ask for a tail." Lena shoved at his chest, but he didn't move an inch. "I didn't ask for any of this. You told me to leave, remember? You told me I was a mistake. So why are you here? Why do you care if I get run off the road?" "Because you are mine." The words exploded out of him, raw and primal. The silence that followed was deafening. Dario stared at her, his chest heaving, as if the admission had been torn from his throat against his will. Lena stared back, stunned, her mouth slightly open. "I tried," Dario said, his voice dropping to a rough, desperate growl. He stepped closer, crowding her, forcing her to retreat until the back of her legs hit the coffee table. "I tried to let you go. I tried to keep you out of this. But then I get a call that you are speeding through traffic with a Montavio Scout on your bumper. And He cut himself off, shaking his head. "I stopped breathing. Lena, I stopped breathing until I saw you standing here." "You hurt me," Lena whispered, tears finally spilling over. "You made me feel like nothing. I was trying to save you," he rasped. He reached out, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears with rough tenderness. But it is too late. They know you are my weakness, and if I leave you alone here, they will take you to break me. I am not a weakness, she said fiercely, grabbing his wrists. No, Dario murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. You are not. You are the only thing that matters. The tension in the room shifted violently. The fear and the anger evaporated, replaced by a combustible need that sucked the air from their lungs. Dario kissed her. It wasn't like the first time. It wasn't slow or gentle. It was a collision. He devoured her, his mouth hungry and possessive, claiming her with a ferocity that bordered on violence. Lena met him with equal force, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid reality of him. He walked her backward, stumbling over the rug until she hit the wall. He pressed his body against hers, the heavy, hard weight of him pinning her in place. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, gripping her waist, sliding down to her hips to pull her flush against him. You don't run from me, he growled against her lips, biting the lower one gently. A punishment and a plea. Never again. Then don't push me away, Lena gasped, arching into his touch. Dario buried his face in the curve of her neck. He inhaled her fragrance, the unique fragrance of her skin that had haunted his dreams for the last 3 nights. A primal instinct took over, an ancient drive to mark what belonged to him, to warn the world that she was taken. He kissed the sensitive skin beneath her ear, sucking hard. Lena cried out, a sound of shock and pleasure, her head falling back against the wall. He didn't stop. He bit down gently, soothing the spot with his tongue, leaving a dark, undeniable mark on her throat. Mine, he whispered against her skin, the vibration traveling through her bones. Lena didn't resist. She didn't want to resist. In a world that was spinning out of control, this mark felt like an anchor. It felt like a promise. Dario pulled back, his eyes black and blown wide. He looked at the mark on her neck, then up at her flushed face. He took a ragged breath, visibly reining himself in. Pack a bag, he said, his voice rough but steady. You are not staying here tonight. You are not staying here ever again. Dario, no arguments, he commanded. You are coming to the penthouse. I am putting security on the door, in the lobby, and in the elevator. You will sleep in my bed where I can see you, where I can reach you. Lena looked at him. She saw the fear beneath the command, the desperate need to keep her safe. She nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. The penthouse was different this time. It didn't feel cold. It felt like a fortress. Dario didn't leave her side. He watched her while she unpacked the few things she had brought. He watched her while she washed her face in the sprawling master bathroom. He was like a guard dog, vigilant and tense, waiting for a threat that wasn't there. Later that night, after the lights were out, the silence between them was heavy but comfortable. They lay in the massive bed, limbs tangled together. The physical desperation had burned itself out, leaving behind a quiet, aching intimacy. Lena traced the line of his shoulder with her fingertips. Her hand drifted down his back, over the smooth muscle, until her fingers encountered something rough. She paused. There, running diagonally across his back from his right shoulder blade to his lower spine, was a lattice of scar tissue. It was thick, jagged, and old. It looked like the aftermath of a whip, or perhaps fire. It was a map of pain etched into his skin. Dario stiffened as her fingers brushed the ridges. He didn't move away, but his breathing stopped for a second. Dario? Lena whispered, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim light. What is this? What happened? For a long time, he didn't answer. He lay face down, his head resting on his arms, the muscles of his back bunched tight. I told you, he said finally, his voice muffled by the pillow. Betrayal has a cost. Who did this to you? Dario turned over slowly, capturing her hand in his. He brought her knuckles to his lips, kissing them softly, his eyes sad and ancient in the darkness. It was a long time ago, he said quietly, before I was the boss. When I was just a soldier who believed in loyalty above all else. I trusted the wrong man. I thought we were brothers. I didn't see the knife coming until it was already carving me open." He placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "The scars on my back healed," he said, "but the trust. Trust broke that day, Lena. It never grew back until you." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. She understood now. She understood the coldness, the walls, the hesitation. He wasn't empty. He was terrified. He was a man holding himself together with sheer will, waiting for the next knife. "I am not him," she whispered fiercely. "I will never hurt you." Dario looked at her, his gaze searching her face, reading the truth in her eyes. He pulled her down, tucking her head under his chin, wrapping his arms around her so tightly it was almost painful. "I know." He breathed into her hair, and in the safety of his arms, surrounded by the steel and glass of his tower. Lena finally slept without dreaming of running, but Dario remained awake, watching the door, his hand resting protectively on the curve of her hip, waiting for the war he knew was coming. The days inside the Vescari penthouse bled into one another, a seamless loop of luxury and confinement. For Lena, the penthouse was a gilded cage, beautiful but suffocating. She spent her mornings wandering the expansive rooms, her fingers trailing over cold marble surfaces and leather furniture that cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. It was on one of these aimless wanderings that she found the drawer. Dario was in the shower, the sound of running water a distant hum. Lena was in his study, a room she usually avoided, but boredom had made her bold. She wasn't snooping, she told herself. She was just looking for a pen to write a grocery list, a futile exercise given that Dario's staff stocked the refrigerator before she could even ask. The desk was massive, a slab of dark mahogany that dominated the room. Most of the drawers were locked, their contents secured behind steel mechanisms. But the bottom drawer on the right side was slightly askew. The latch had not caught. Lena hesitated. The smart thing to do was to push it shut and walk away. Dario valued his privacy above all else. He had made that clear. But curiosity was a powerful tide. She hooked her finger over the edge of the wood and pulled. The drawer slid open silently. Inside, there were no files, no weapons, no stacks of cash. There was only a single, silver-framed photograph lying face up on the velvet lining. Lena reached in and lifted it. The picture was old, the colors slightly faded. It showed a woman with dark, laughing eyes and a smile that lit up her entire face. In her arms, she held a toddler, a little girl with curly hair and a ribbon in her dress. They were sitting on a picnic blanket, caught in a candid moment of pure, unadulterated joy. Lena stared at the image, her heart squeezing. She looked at the woman's face and saw the ghost of Dario in the little girl's eyes. This was not a mistress. This was family. This was a past he had never spoken of, a happiness that had been extinguished. She heard the water shut off in the bathroom down the hall. Panic flared. Lena quickly placed the photo back in the drawer, exactly as she had found it, and slid the drawer shut until the latch clicked. She stepped back, her breath coming in short bursts. She didn't ask him about it. She couldn't. To ask would be to acknowledge that she had pried into the one part of his soul he kept buried. But the image stayed with her. It explained the shadows in his eyes. It explained the desperate, terrifying way he held her at night, as if he expected her to vanish if he let go. As the week wore on, the dynamic between them shifted. Dario, usually a slave to his empire, began to neglect it. He missed meetings. He ignored calls from his capos. He spent hours just sitting with Lena on the balcony, watching the city lights, his hand resting heavy and possessive on her knee. He was pulling back from the world, his focus narrowing until it encompassed only her. It was a heady, intoxicating kind of love, but it came with a price. The bill came due on a rainy Tuesday evening. Silvio burst into the penthouse without knocking. He was dripping wet, his face pale and grim. Dario was in the kitchen pouring wine for Lena. He set the bottle down slowly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What is it?" Dario asked, his voice low. "It is Enzo," Silvio said, his voice tight. "He didn't report for his shift at the warehouse. We found his car abandoned by the docks." Dario went still. "And?" Silvio pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and placed it on the marble island. He pressed play. The voice that crackled to life was distorted, but the menace was clear. You took something that didn't belong to you. Vescari. Now we have taken something of yours. Give us the girl, or the body count rises. You have 24 hours. The recording clicked off. Silence descended on the kitchen, heavy and suffocating. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "This is my fault," she whispered. The words tasted like ash. "They want me. They took Enzo because of me." "No," Dario said immediately. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. "This is not on you. This is the Montavios being desperate. They are trying to squeeze me. They are going to kill him. Dario!" Lena cried, stepping toward him. "You heard them. They want a trade. Give them to me, and your man goes free." "Absolutely not," Dario snarled. He slammed his hand onto the counter, the sound making her jump. "We do not negotiate with terrorists, and I am certainly not handing you over to be butchered by animals." "So you will let Enzo die?" Lena challenged, her voice trembling. "He's one of your men. You value loyalty above everything. How can you sacrifice him for me? I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let them touch you," Dario said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, a cold promise of violence. "Do not speak of this again. You are staying here. Silvio, double the guard downstairs. No one comes in. No one goes out." He turned and stormed out of the kitchen, heading for his study to plan a war. Lena stood there, paralyzed by guilt. She thought of the photo in the drawer. She thought of the woman and the child. Dario had lost people before. If Enzo died, if more of his men died because he was too focused on protecting her, it would destroy him. He would eventually resent her. The love would turn to poison. She knew what she had to do. 3 hours later, the penthouse was quiet. Dario was still in his study, shouting orders into a phone. The guards were at the front door, but Lena knew the service schedule. She knew the housekeeping staff used the freight elevator in the back pantry, and she knew the code because she had watched Dario punch it in once when they ordered food. She wrote a note on a napkin. "I won't let you lose anyone else." She left it on his pillow, moving like a ghost. She slipped into the pantry. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She punched in the code. The heavy metal doors slid open. She stepped inside, hitting the button for the ground floor. The descent felt like falling. When the doors opened into the loading dock, the air was cold and smelled of rain and exhaust. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked out into the night. She found a taxi 2 blocks away. "The docks," she told the driver, her voice hollow. "Warehouse District." The ride was a blur of neon lights and rain-streaked windows. When the taxi dropped her off at the edge of the Montavio territory, fear nearly paralyzed her. The warehouses loomed like sleeping beasts in the dark. She forced herself to walk forward, her hands raised in surrender. "I am here," she screamed into the darkness. "I am Lena Caro, let him go." Shadows detached themselves from the building. 3 men. They didn't look like negotiators. They looked like executioners. "Well, look at that," one of them sneered, stepping into the light. The boss's pet came to heel. "I am here," Lena said, her voice shaking but loud. "Let Enzo go. That was the deal." The man laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "There was no deal, sweetheart. We were always going to kill him. And now we have the leverage to make Vescari beg." Before she could turn, before she could run, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. She was dragged backward, kicking and screaming into the void as the darkness swallowed her whole. Dario found the note 20 minutes later. He read the 6 words, and for a moment, his heart simply stopped beating. The world tilted on its axis. The invincible armor he wore, the persona of the untouchable boss, shattered into dust. He didn't scream. He didn't throw things. He went deadly, terrifyingly quiet. He walked into the living room where Silvio was coordinating the search teams. Silvio looked up, saw the look on Dario's face, and went pale. "Where is she?" Dario asked. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "She's in the bedroom, boss." Silvio said, confused. "The guards are at the door. No one passed them." "She's gone," Dario said. He moved so fast Silvio didn't have time to flinch. Dario grabbed his right-hand man by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him against the wall. A vase crashed to the floor, shattering. "You were supposed to watch her!" Dario roared, the rage finally erupting. "I trusted you with her life. She walked out the back while you were staring at the front door." "Dario, stop!" Silvio gasped, holding his hands up. "We will find her. We will get her back." Dario released him. Stepping back, his chest heaving, he ran a hand through his hair, gripping the strands tight enough to pull. A memory, sharp and agonizing, clawed its way to the surface. Flashback. It was summer. The sun was blinding. He was younger, softer. Elena was laughing, buckling Sophia into the car seat. "We will see you at the restaurant, she had said. She blew him a kiss. He had watched them drive away. He had felt safe. He had felt happy. Then came the noise, the earth-shaking boom that rattled the windows of the house. The plume of black smoke rising into the blue sky. They run down the driveway, his lungs burning, screaming their names, the twisted metal, the silence. They had been caught in a crossfire meant for him. He had been the target, but they were the casualties. He had buried his heart in 2 small coffins and promised himself he would never feel anything again. End flashback. Dario blinked, the vision fading, leaving the taste of bile in his mouth. He was not that young man anymore. He was not helpless. He was the monster in the dark that other monsters feared. "Get the car," Dario said. His voice was devoid of humanity. It was pure, cold steel. "Call everyone, every soldier, every favor. We are going to the docks." "Boss," Silvio warned, straightening his jacket. "If we hit the Montavios on their home turf, it is war. The police, the feds, everyone will come down on us." Dario turned to him. His eyes were black pits. "Let them come," Dario said. "Tonight, I will kill everyone who stands between me and her." The Montavio warehouse smelled of rust and old blood. Lena was tied to a chair in the center of the open floor. Her lip was split, a trickle of blood running down her chin. Her coat had been torn. She was shivering, not from cold, but from the aftershocks of the blow to her face. 3 men stood around her, smoking cigarettes, laughing. Enzo was nowhere to be seen. "You think he is coming?" one of them asked, flicking ash onto the concrete. "He will come," another said, "and when he does, we will be ready." The lights in the warehouse flickered. Then they went out. Pitch blackness descended. The men shouted, fumbling for their flashlights. "What the hell? Check the breaker!" A sound cut through the darkness. It was the wet, distinct sound of a knife finding its mark, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. "Who is there?" one of the men screamed, panning his flashlight wildly. The beam caught a figure standing on the catwalk above. It was a shadow, darker than the surrounding night. Dario dropped. He landed with the grace of a predator, rolling to absorb the impact and coming up with a gun in his hand. He didn't speak. He didn't monologue. He simply fired. 2 shots. 2 bodies dropped. The warehouse erupted into chaos. More men poured in from the side offices, weapons drawn, the air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire. Dario moved like a wraith. He wove through the crates, using the environment as a weapon. He was brutal and efficient. He shot a man in the knee, then knocked him unconscious with the butt of his pistol. He disarmed another, twisting the man's arm until it snapped, then throwing him into a stack of pallets. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. Dario was a hurricane of violence, fueled by a decade of grief and an hour of pure terror. He didn't stop moving, didn't stop firing until the hammer of his gun clicked on an empty chamber. Silence returned to the warehouse, heavier than before. Dario dropped the empty magazine and reloaded, his hands steady. He walked into the center of the room, stepping over the groaning bodies of his enemies. He holstered the weapon. He saw her. Lena was still tied to the chair, her eyes wide with shock. She was staring at him as if he were a stranger. A god of vengeance descended from the heavens. Dario fell to his knees in front of her. The violence drained out of him instantly, replaced by a desperate, shaking fear. "Lena," he choked out. He pulled a knife from his boot and slashed the ropes binding her wrists and ankles. The moment she was free, she launched herself at him. She didn't pull away. She didn't look at the carnage around them. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his chest, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she cried, her voice muffled by his shirt. "I'm so sorry. I thought I could save them." Dario wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against him. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, proving to himself that she was warm, that she was breathing, that she wasn't just a memory in a silver frame. "I have you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears, hot and unbidden, tracked through the grime on his face. "I have you. You are alive." He rocked her back and forth, clinging to her with a raw, primal need. He kissed her hair, her temple, her bloodied lip. He held her as if he were trying to absorb her into his own skin, to keep her there forever where nothing could ever hurt her again. "Let's go home," he murmured against her ear. "Let's go home." He picked her up, cradling her against his chest, and carried her out of the darkness, leaving the ruins of his enemies behind him. The silence in the penthouse was different now. It was no longer the silence of a tomb or a fortress. It was the heavy, exhausted silence of a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. Dario sat on the edge of the massive bathtub, his white shirt discarded on the floor, stained with grime and the blood of men who would never threaten anyone again. Lena stood between his spread knees, a damp cloth in her hand. She was gentle as she wiped the soot and dried blood from his chest, her movements rhythmic and soothing. Neither of them had spoken since they entered the elevator. The adrenaline that had fueled Dario's rampage at the warehouse was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a terrifying clarity. He looked at Lena. Her lip was swollen, a bruise blooming purple along her jawline, but her eyes were dry and clear. She looked shattered, yet indestructible. He caught her wrist, stopping the motion of the cloth. "I should have killed them all slower," he murmured, his voice a rough rasp. His thumb brushed the bruise on her face, his hand trembling slightly. "For touching you." Lena set the cloth aside on the marble rim. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension that turned his muscles to stone. "They are gone, Dario. It is over." "It is never over," he replied, his gaze dropping to the floor. "There is always another wolf, always another war. Then we fight it," she said simply. Dario looked up, shaking his head slowly. The mask of the ruthless dawn was gone, stripped away by the terror of nearly losing her. In its place was a man who looked lost. "I cannot fight when I'm terrified. Lena, tonight. When I saw that empty room, I ceased to function. I was not a general. I was a panic-stricken fool." Lena stepped closer, pressing herself against his knees, forcing him to look at her. "Dario, look at me." He met her gaze, his dark eyes swimming with a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "Will you ever let yourself be loved again?" she asked. The question hung in the steam-filled air, heavy and absolute. Dario closed his eyes, letting out a breath that sounded like a surrender. He leaned his forehead against her stomach, wrapping his arms around her waist, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in a disintegrating world. "I didn't plan for you," he whispered, the words muffled against her sweater. "My life was ordered. It was cold, and it was safe. I had built walls so high that not even the sun could get over them." He tightened his grip. "Then you walked in laughing at a customer, wearing that ridiculous apron, and you ruined me." Lena wove her fingers into his damp hair. "Ruined you?" He looked up, his expression fierce and raw. "You made me feel alive again, and a man who feels alive has something to lose. I am terrified. Lena, I am terrified every time you walk out a door." "Then don't let me walk out," she whispered. The admission broke the last dam holding back the flood. Dario stood up, water dripping from his hair, and pulled her into him. This time, there was no frantic desperation, no rough claiming. He kissed her with a slow, aching tenderness that shattered her completely. He carried her to the bed, laying her down as if she were made of spun glass. The lovemaking that followed was a conversation without words. It was a confession. Every touch was a reverence, every kiss a promise. He traced the lines of her body with his hands, memorizing her, worshipping the pulse in her throat and the beat of her heart. It was gentle, intimate, and deeply emotional. For the first time, the darkness of his world didn't enter the room. There was only the soft glow of the city lights below and the warmth of two people who had found home in the wreckage of their lives. The next morning, the reality of their situation arrived with the sunrise. Lena woke to find Dario dressed. He was packing a leather duffel bag at the foot of the bed. He looked rested, but the steely resolve was back in his eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked, propping herself up on her elbows. Dario paused, holding a stack of cash. He turned to her. "I have made arrangements. There is a private plane waiting at the airstrip south of the city. It leaves in 2 hours." Lena frowned, confusion clouding her sleep-heavy mind. "A plane? Where are we going?" "We're not going anywhere," Dario said gently. "You are going to Tuscany." Lena went still. "Excuse me?" Dario walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge. He took her hand, his grip firm. "I have a villa there. It is secluded, walled, and guarded by men who answer only to me. You will be safe there. Lena, the Montavios cannot reach you across the ocean. You will have a new name, a new life. You can paint, you can read. You can be free of this poison." He said it like it was a gift. He thought he was saving her. Thought he was. Lena pulled her hand away as if she had been burned. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her, her anger flaring hot and bright. "You are sending me away?" she demanded. "After last night? After you told me I made you feel alive? Because you make me feel alive," Dario argued, his voice rising. "I cannot do what needs to be done if I am worrying about you every second of the day. The Montavios have declared total war. The streets are going to run red. Lena, I cannot have you in the crossfire. So you ship me off like a package?" Lena scrambled out of bed, ignoring her nakedness as she grabbed her robe. She paced the room, furious. "You decide my life for me? I get a villa and a guard dog, and you get to stay here and die." "I have to stay here and survive." Dario stood up, matching her intensity. "I am doing this for you." "I don't want it," Lena shouted. She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her chest heaving. "I don't want to be safe. Dario, I don't want Tuscany. I don't want a view of a vineyard if I have to look at it alone. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." She closed the distance between them, poking a finger into his chest. "You are scared. You think that if you send me away, you don't have to worry about losing me. But you will lose me, Dario. If you put me on that plane, you lose me. I want you. Here. Fighting. Living. I want the mess. Dario, I want all of it." Dario stared at her, his jaw working. He looked like a man trying to hold back an avalanche with his bare hands. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't a text. It was the specific ringtone for Silvio. Dario snatched it up, his eyes never leaving Lena's face. "What?" He listened for a moment, his expression hardening into stone. "Where? Are you sure?" He paused. "I'm on my way. Keep them contained." He hung up and looked at Lena. The vulnerability was gone, locked away behind the armor of the boss. "The Montavio leadership has been spotted at a meeting house near the river. If I strike now, I can end this. I can cut the head off the snake." "Dario," Lena warned, grabbing his arm. "I have to go," he said. He leaned down and kissed her hard, brief and final. "Silvio is downstairs. He will drive you to the airstrip. Please, Lena, for me, get on the plane." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the penthouse, taking the air from the room with him. Lena stood in the center of the living room for a long time, listening to the silence. She was not getting on that plane. She would drag her heels. She would scream. She would fight the pilot if she had to. She went to the kitchen to make coffee, her mind racing with ways to convince Dario to let her stay. As she passed the hallway, she heard a voice. It was coming from the service entrance, near the laundry room. Yes, he just left. It was Silvio. Lena froze. Silvio was supposed to be downstairs preparing the car. Why was he whispering in the laundry room? She crept closer, pressing her back against the wall. "He's heading to the river," Silvio said, his voice low and urgent. "It is a perfect setup. He thinks he is ambushing you. but he is walking into a kill box. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. The world tilted. Silvio, Dario's right hand, the man who had warned her about the wars Dario had fought. "I did what I had to do," Silvio continued, his tone defensive. "He is out of control. He started a war over a waitress. He's burning the business to the ground for her. When he is gone, we can make peace. We can stabilize the territory." A pause. "Yes, I have a girl. I will bring her to you at Rossi's, the alleyway. You can do what you want with her. Just make sure Vascari doesn't leave the river alive." The betrayal was so absolute, so cold. It nearly knocked the wind out of her. Silvio wasn't just a traitor, he was a pragmatist. He viewed Dario's love for her as a disease that needed to be cut out to save the host. Lena backed away, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to warn him. She had to stop him. She turned to run back to the bedroom to find her phone, but her foot caught the edge of a rug. She stumbled, her hand hitting a vase on the hallway table. It didn't break, but it wobbled with a loud, ceramic clatter. The silence from the laundry room was instant. "Lena?" Silvio's voice was calm, too calm. She didn't answer. She bolted. She sprinted for the front door, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood. She made it to the foyer before a massive hand clamped onto her arm. Silvio spun her around. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. "I'm sorry. Lena, I truly am. You seem like a nice girl, but you have cancer." "He will kill you," Lena hissed, struggling against his grip. "He will tear you apart." "He will be dead in 20 minutes, Silvio said impassively. "And the Vascari Empire will survive. That is all that matters." He dragged her toward the service elevator. "Change of plans. We're going to Rossi's. It seems fitting to end it where it started." The alley behind Rossi's lounge was a narrow, grime-streaked canyon of brick and wet pavement. It was raining again. A cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the cobblestones. Silvio shoved Lena out of the car. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back. The alley was empty, save for a few dumpsters and the heavy steel door that led to the kitchen storage. "Where are they?" Lena demanded, shivering in the cold. She was still wearing her robe, having had no time to dress. "They are coming," Silvio said, checking his watch. He pulled a gun from his waistband. "And so is he." "You said he was at the river," Lena said, confusion cutting through her fear. "I lied to the Montavios about the river," Silvio said. "And I sent a message to Dario 5 minutes ago telling him I had you here. He's not at the river. He's coming for you." Lena stared at him in horror. "You are playing both sides. I'm cleaning up the mess," Silvio corrected. "The Montavios killed Dario here. I kill the Montavios for killing my boss. I emerge as the grieving successor who avenged the Dawn. Order is restored." "You are a monster," Lena whispered. "I'm a businessman," Silvio replied. Tires screeched at the mouth of the alley. A black SUV roared in, blocking the exit. At the other end, 2 sedans pulled up, headlights blinding in the gloom. The Montavios. Silvio stepped back into the shadows of the doorway, using Lena as a shield. Right on time. The door of the SUV flew open. Dario stepped out. He wasn't wearing a tactical vest, and he wasn't holding a rifle. He was in his suit, holding a single pistol. He looked at the Montavio men swarming from the sedans, and then he looked at Lena. He saw the zip ties. He saw Silvio standing behind her with a gun pressed to her spine. Dario didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for terms. He raised his weapon and fired. The shot took the lead Montavio soldier in the throat. Hell broke loose. The alley erupted in gunfire. Bullets sparked against the brick walls, whining through the air like angry hornets. Dario moved behind the engine block of the SUV, firing with terrifying precision. "Kill him," Silvio roared to the Montavios, pushing Lena down behind a dumpster. "He is one man," but he was one man with nothing left to lose. Dario popped up, dropping another attacker. He was advancing. He wasn't taking cover. He was moving forward, walking through the storm of lead toward Lena. "Dario, go back," Lena screamed. Struggling to her knees, Silvio realized his plan was unraveling. The Montavios were falling back under Dario's relentless advance. Silvio cursed, raising his gun not at Dario, but at Lena. "Stop!" Silvio shouted. Dario froze. He stood in the open, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his chest heaving. A red bloom was spreading on his white shirt, just above his hip. He had been hit. "It is over, boss," Silvio yelled over the rain. "Put the gun down, or she dies right now." Dario looked at Silvio. The look wasn't one of betrayal. It was one of absolute pity. "You never understood." "Silvio," Dario called out, his voice steady despite the blood soaking his shirt. "You think power is the only thing that matters." "Drop it," Silvio screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Dario dropped the gun. Silvio exhaled, a smile touching his lips. "Good. Now." He never finished the sentence. Lena, fueled by a rage that eclipsed her fear, threw herself backward. She slammed her body weight into Silvio's legs. It wasn't a graceful move, but it was unexpected. Silvio stumbled, his shot going wide, chipping the brick inches from Lena's head. Dario didn't dive for his gun. He dove for them. He hit Silvio like a freight train. The impact drove the traitor into the metal door of the lounge. The gun skittered away across the wet pavement. Dario didn't punch him. He grabbed Silvio by the throat and slammed his head against the brick wall. Once. Twice. The sound was sickening. Silvio crumpled to the ground, unconscious or worse, but the Montavios were regrouping. "He's unarmed! Get him!" Dario grabbed Lena, pulling her up. He fumbled for a knife in his pocket and sliced her bonds. "Inside!" he gasped, shoving her toward the heavy steel door. He kicked it open. They tumbled into the kitchen storage area. Bullets chewed up the doorframe around them. Dario slammed the heavy metal door shut and threw the deadbolt. "They will blow the lock!" he wheezed, leaning heavily against the door. His face was gray. The stain on his shirt was spreading fast. "We need to hide," Lena cried, grabbing his arm. "Dario, you are bleeding." "The freezer," he gritted out. "It is reinforced." "Thick steel. They can't shoot through it." He stumbled toward the walk-in freezer at the back of the storage room. Lena pulled the heavy handle, and they stumbled inside. The cold hit them instantly. It was a biting, absolute zero that seared the lungs. The room was filled with hanging sides of beef and crates of ice. Lena shoved the door shut from the inside. The latch clicked, sealing them in an airtight, soundproof box of ice. The silence was sudden and ringing. Dario slid down the metal wall, his legs giving out. He landed hard, clutching his side. Blood, dark and glossy, pooled on the metal floor, steaming in the frigid air. "Dario!" Lena dropped to her knees beside him. She ripped the hem of her robe, bunching the fabric up and pressing it against the wound. He groaned, his head falling back against the wall. His skin was already pale, and the cold was making him shake violently. "It is not good," he whispered, his teeth chattering. "You are going to be fine," Lena said, her voice trembling. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "You are too stubborn to die in a freezer." Dario Vescari. "Cold," he mumbled. "So cold." "I am here," Lena sobbed. She moved closer, wrapping her body around his, trying to share her warmth. She pressed her forehead against his. "Stay with me. Look at me." Dario opened his eyes. They were hazy, losing focus. He lifted a hand, his fingers stained with his own blood, and touched her cheek. I came back," he whispered. "You came back," she confirmed, kissing his freezing palm. "I chose," he rasped, struggling for breath. "I chose the mess." A sob tore through Lena's throat. Yes, you did. And we are going to live through it. Do you hear me? We are going to live." Outside, the muffled thuds of the Montavios trying to batter down the outer door vibrated through the floor. But inside, time seemed to stretch. Dario's hand fell to her waist, gripping her tightly. "Lena, I am here. If I don't... No." She cut him off fiercely and desperately. "Don't you dare say goodbye. You promised me. Remember? You promised you wouldn't run." Dario let out a weak, breathy laugh that turned into a cough. "I am not running. I am just... resting." He leaned his head on her shoulder. The cold was seeping into their bones, slowing their hearts. The blood loss was making him drowsy. Lena held him, her hands pressing hard against the wound, her own body shaking from the cold and the terror. "We don't lose each other," she whispered into the freezing air, a vow against the darkness. "We won't lose to each other again. Promise," Dario breathed, his voice barely audible. His eyes drifted shut. Lena buried her face in his neck, listening to the shallow, ragged rhythm of his breathing, praying that the sirens she heard faintly in the distance were coming for them, and that they weren't too late. The sirens that night did not signal rescue. They signaled a different kind of ending. Dario survived the freezer. When the police finally cut through the heavy steel doors with thermal lances, they found him barely conscious, his blood freezing to the metal floor, but his hand was still gripped tight around Lena's. He was rushed to surgery, a chaos of lights and shouting, while Lena was detained, questioned, and eventually released when expensive lawyers materialized out of the ether to shield her. He lived, but the world he woke up to was burning. The shootout in the alley had not ended the war. It had poured gasoline on it. The Montavios, humiliated and leaderless after the loss of their key captains in the warehouse raid, had become feral. They were striking at Viscari businesses in broad daylight. Worse, the police commissioner, who had looked the other way for years, was now under federal pressure to deliver a head on a platter. Even Dario's own lieutenants, sensing blood in the water and seeing their leader weakened by a bullet to the gut, were beginning to circle like sharks. The Viscari empire was crumbling. 3 weeks after the shooting, Dario sat in a safe house on the outskirts of the city. He was thinner, his movement stiff and pained, the wound in his side a constant, throbbing reminder of his mortality. Lena sat across from him. The table between them was covered in burner phones and maps. "You cannot go back," Lena said. Her voice was quiet but possessed a steel that had not been there 6 months ago. "If you step back into the city, you die. If the Montavios don't get you, the feds will lock you away for the rest of your life. There is no winning this. Dario." Dario looked at the map of Elmira, the city he had ruled, the city that was now trying to devour him. He looked at Lena. She looked tired. The shadows under her eyes were deep, and she flinched when cars drove past the window too slowly. He had done this to her. He had dragged her into the dark. And now, the dark was refusing to let her go. "I know," Dario rasped. "I cannot hold the throne, but I cannot just walk away. Lena, a king does not retire. He rules until he is buried." "Then let them bury you," Lena said. Dario looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What?" "Give them what they want," she said, leaning forward. "Give them a body. Give them a tragedy. Dario Viscari has to die so that you can live." The plan was madness. It required liquidating assets in secret, buying silence with millions of dollars, and trusting a handful of soldiers who were loyal not to the money, but to the man. It took 2 weeks to set up. On a Tuesday night, exactly 1 month after the alleyway shooting, the Viscari estate, the symbol of his power, the fortress on the hill, erupted. The explosion shook the windows of houses 3 miles away. It was a gas leak. The news reports said later, a tragic, catastrophic failure in the basement systems. The fire raged until dawn, consuming the art, the history, and the man who was reportedly recovering inside. Dental records would later match a body found in the wreckage, a body procured from the morgue, a John Doe with no name. Given a final purpose in death, the city of Elmira held its breath, the Montavios celebrated, the police closed the file. The king was dead, and Lena Caro? She vanished into the smoke, a grieving girlfriend who packed a single bag and disappeared, likely running from the ghosts of a life that had burned to the ground. 1 year later, the rain in Oregon was different from the rain in Elmira, in the city. The rain tasted of asphalt and exhaust. Here, in the small coastal town of Oakhaven, it tasted of pine needles, salt spray, and deep, ancient earth. Lena stood behind the counter of The Turning Page, a small bookstore and cafe she had bought with cash 6 months ago. The shop was warm, smelling of roasted coffee beans and old paper. It was quiet, safe. She wiped down the espresso machine, her movements slow and meditative. Outside. The gray sky pressed down on the ocean, the waves crashing against the jagged cliffs in a rhythmic lullaby. She looked different. Her hair was longer, tied back in a loose braid. She wore a thick, oversized sweater and jeans. Devoid of the black uniform she had worn at Rossi's, she looked healthier, the sharp edges of her anxiety smoothed down by the rhythm of the tides. But her eyes were still watchful. She still checked the exits when she entered a room, and she still wore the ring. It was a simple silver band on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath her sweater against her skin. It was the only thing she had kept from her old life, that and the memories. The bell above the door chimed. Lena didn't look up immediately. "I will be right with you," she called out, focusing on steaming a pitcher of milk. "Feel free to browse. The new fiction is on the table by the window." There was no answer. No sound of footsteps moving toward the shelves. Just the sound of the door closing, shutting out the wind and the rain. A strange prickle danced down Lena's spine. It was a sensation she hadn't felt in 12 months. A shift in the air pressure. A sudden, heavy gravity entered the room. She turned off the steamer. The hiss of the machine died away, leaving a ringing silence in the shop. She turned around slowly. A man was standing just inside the door, dripping water onto the worn wooden floorboards. He was wearing a heavy fisherman's coat and dark work boots. He had a beard, thick and dark, threaded with premature gray that hadn't been there a year ago. He was thinner, the sharp angles of his face more pronounced, giving him a rugged, weathered look. He leaned heavily on a cane held in his right hand, but the eyes were the same, dark, intense, and currently fixed on her with a hunger that could consume the world. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. The rag she was holding dropped to the floor. "Hello, Lena," he said. His voice was rougher, rusted from disuse, but it was him. It was Dario. He wasn't Dario Vescari anymore. That man was dead. This was someone else, a man named Matteo, according to the passport she had helped forge, a man with a limp and a quiet life. But to her, he was just him. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She moved around the counter, her legs feeling like they didn't belong to her. She walked toward him, slowly at first, then faster. He dropped the cane. It clattered loudly on the floor. He opened his arms. Lena collided with him. She hit his chest hard, burying her face in the rough wool of his coat. She smelled the rain, the ocean, and beneath it all, the faint, familiar scent of sandalwood and skin. "You are late," she sobbed, her voice muffled against him. She hit his chest with her fist, a weak, trembling blow. "You said 6 months. It has been a year." "There were complications," Dario murmured, wrapping his arms around her. He held her tightly, lifting her slightly off the floor, burying his face in her neck. "I had to be sure. I had to be sure no one was watching. I had to be sure it was safe." "I hate you," she cried, clutching the back of his coat, holding on for dear life. "I know," he whispered. "I love you too." He walked her backward, his limp pronounced, favoring his left side where the bullet had done its damage. He backed her into the small storage room behind the history section and kicked the door shut, locking out the world, locking out the rain, locking out the past. They stood there in the dim light, breathing each other in. Lena pulled back, her hands framing his face, her thumbs tracing the new lines around his eyes, the roughness of his beard. "You look different," she whispered. "I am just a man now." "Lena," he said softly. "No empire, no soldiers, just a man with a bad leg and a bookstore owner he can't stop thinking about." He leaned his forehead against hers. The proximity triggered a memory, sharp and visceral, transporting her back to the night everything changed. Flashback. 1 year ago. The penthouse was stripped bare. The paintings were gone. The furniture was covered in sheets. It looked like a ghost ship waiting to sink. It was their last night before the explosion, before the separation. Dario had lit candles, hundreds of them, their flickering light softening the harsh modern angles of the room. Outside, the city of Elmira glittered, indifferent to the fact that its king was about to abdicate. They stood in the center of the room. There were no words left to say. They had gone over the plan 1,000 times. They knew the risks. They knew the likelihood of never seeing each other again was high. Dario reached out and untied the silk robe she wore. It pooled at her feet. He didn't touch her like a possession this time. He touched her like a memory he was trying to preserve. His hands moved over her skin with agonizing slowness, mapping every curve, every scar, every shiver. They moved to the rug in front of the fireplace. The lovemaking was slow, a desperate, silent communion. There was no rush to the finish. They wanted to exist in the in-between, in the moments where their hearts beat against each other in a synchronized rhythm. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, the pulse at her wrist. She held him, feeling the scars on his back, the jagged history of his pain, and tried to heal it all with her touch. When he finally entered her, he watched her face. He kept his eyes locked on hers, an intense, unwavering connection that stripped them both bare. It was an act of worship. It was a goodbye. If I don't make it, he had whispered against her lips, his voice breaking. Know that this was the only part of my life that was truly mine. You will make it, she had sworn, pulling him down to her. You will find me. Present day. The memory faded. Replaced by the reality of the dusty back room in Oakhaven, Dario was here. He had kept his promise. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, blood-flavored kiss of the alley. It wasn't the terrified kiss of the freezer. It was a kiss of peace. It tasted like coffee and rain. It was deep and steady, grounded in the earth beneath their feet. There were no guns on his hips. There was no blood on his hands. The silence around them wasn't waiting for a gunshot. It was just silence. Dario pulled back, resting his hands on her waist. He looked around the cramped storage room, at the stacks of unsold inventory and the mop bucket in the corner. It is not a penthouse, he noted, a small, crooked smile touching his lips, a smile she had never seen before. It was a free smile. It is better, Lena said, wiping the tears from her cheeks. It is ours, and nobody here cares who you were. They only care if you can fix a leaky shelf. I think I can manage a shelf, Dario said. He ran his hand down her arm, intertwining their fingers. I missed you, Lena. Every hour, every breath. I missed you too, she whispered. She reached up and toyed with the collar of his coat, a mischievous glint returning to her eyes, the same spark that had started a war in a nightclub a lifetime ago. She leaned back against the doorframe, tilting her head, looking at him through her lashes. You know, she said softly, a playful tease entering her voice. You really shouldn't be back here, sir. Customers aren't allowed in the storage room. I might have to call the manager. Dario laughed. It was a rusty, beautiful sound. He stepped closer, crowding her space, the old dominance flaring up for just a second, but tempered now with love. I am not a customer, he rumbled, his voice dropping to that familiar, spine-tingling pitch. Oh no, Lena bit her lip, looking up at him. Then what are you doing here? I was just flirting, she whispered, echoing the words that had sealed her fate that night at Rossi's. Dario's eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide. He reached out, his hand finding the wall beside her head, boxing her in just like he had that first night. But this time, there was no fear, only a promise kept. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, his breath warm against her skin. And I am still taking you against the wall, he murmured, pulling her close. And as the rain fell softly on the roof of the quiet bookstore at the edge of the world, the former king of Elmira and the girl who had ruined him closed the distance. Finally, and forever, home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I was just flirting, she said. Mafia boss slammed his drink and took her against the wall. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Dario from the dangerous underworld of Elmira to their peaceful new beginning on the coast. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did you like that they found peace, or were you expecting a different outcome? Please leave a comment down below letting me know where you are listening from and what you thought of the story. I love reading your feedback in English. If you enjoyed this series and want to hear more passionate, emotional, and thrilling tales, please make sure to hit that subscribe button for the Mafia Romance Stories channel. Give this story a like if it captivated you, and I will see you in the next adventure.